Hello, my name is Dominic May. I'm a pre-service teacher studying a Bachelor of Education graduate entry through Charles Darwin University. This digital story will fulfill the requirements of my final unit before graduating. The requirement of this assignment is to provide up to 6 pieces of rich evidence that prove that I have met the 7 Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership standards. The evidence I will be presenting includes mathematics lessons plans and reflections, earth and space science units of work, behaviour management and communication tools, an Aboriginal Dreamtime story investigation lesson, Charles Darwin University assignments for EPE310 inclusive education and EPE203 teaching Indigenous learners, and professional engagement and development documentation. The Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership standards are a set of requirements established in order to explicitly identify the elements of high-quality teaching. The standards comprise 7 main standards, each with between 4 and 7 substandards that graduate teachers need to be able to prove themselves to have met during their learning journey. During all of the maths lessons at Kangaroo, an approach that covered each of the 4 proficiency standards was planned into the learning trajectory. As an example, in the investigation of fractions lesson pictured above, we worked as groups to investigate what each of the fractions in question actually represents. The kinesthetic learning activity required students to work in a learning community to develop a group and individual understanding of the fractions in question. The extension task, which the entire class managed to get to, was to try and estimate, using their knowledge of fractions, how many times a sheet of paper could be folded in half. This investigation style lesson is a great way of getting students to engage in mathematics and thus garner a deeper understanding of, in this case, number. No teaching strategy can be deemed effective unless students feel they have grasped what was the focus of the lesson. I included a "We are learning today and what I am looking for" into every lesson plan to give students an opportunity to understand the learning goals and what success looked like. Additionally, a plenary system asking students for a fist to 5 gauge of understanding was incorporated into lessons to allow students to guide the direction of future lessons. Alongside the plenary, quizzes and tests gave direct feedback on students' understanding of subject matter and directed future lesson planning. Classroom management is another issue that can hinder or help student learning. As stated in feedback by Vanessa Murray, lesson was well structured, all class were involved and able to answer questions. Equipment was all organised and accessible to class. Of primary concern in all school situations is student safety. While almost every lesson I taught at Kangaroo was undertaken in the classroom environment, the risks of using scissors in any way outside normal use was identified and highlighted to students as required. During the Earth and Space Sciences unit that I delivered based on the Years 5, 6 and 7 Australian Science curriculum, a number of different approaches to learning were included: inquiry-based learning, kinesthetic learning and ICT-based video direct instruction. The inclusion of videos like Exploring Our Solar System that was used in our pre-investigation learning created a highly engaging visual depiction of the planets in our solar system, more than could be achieved through physical text or direct instruction alone. As noted by my mentor teachers, Dominic planned a wonderful unit of work for Earth and Space Sciences. The class were engaged with this unit and enjoyed choosing a planet to research and create a project on. By creating a research project on a chosen planet, students were required to utilise ICT skills to undertake research and were able to work at a level that was within their own ability. The use of ICT allowed students with lower reading confidence or proficiency levels to access alternate sources of information other than only text. Incorporation of ICT allows each student to access video and audio information, increasing their ability to undertake research tasks and maintain engagement and work in a more focused way towards accessible outputs. I designed maths into the unit, for example, in the order and scale of distances and sizes lesson of this unit. Students were required to utilise math in real-world context to measure distances using standard measures on the school oval. Students worked as a group to determine the distances from the Sun to each planet and begin to understand the relative distances from planet to planet. English was included in the inquiry learning lessons on students' chosen planet. The students were introduced to and taught about the information report text genre. A lesson on the expected format and required information was part of the introduction to the project research portion of the unit and was based on an example that I had created as a model. The importance of the main parts of the information text were covered and an expectation of their final project following the template were outlined. During the inquiry research portion of the Earth and Space Sciences project, some students needed to be reminded of the school use of an ICT contract that each student has signed when it was discovered that they were using the technology inappropriately. Reminders of the policy and the loss of ICT privileges were given when required. The final part of the unit of work was assessment of projects. A rubric was developed that covered 4 key points: layout, originality, quality of information, and following the template. The use of a rubric such as this allows for comparative judgments to be made between work and for the teacher to provide students with a pathway to success or improved outcomes in future outputs. Along with assessment, especially on projects, moderation of marking needs to be undertaken in order to check that the assessment judgments and marks allocated for a project are consistently applied. In this case, Vanessa Murray, not my mentor teacher in this unit, was asked to moderate the marks allocated. Vanessa checked the assignments at the bottom and top end against the marking criteria and agreed with the marks given. Students were advised of their marks and the criteria talked through, including how improvements could be achieved in future information text poster assignments. At Kangaroo PS, Class Dojo was the system used to communicate directly and confidentially with parents and caregivers of the students in our class, as well as to create an understanding of acceptable and unacceptable behaviours. The accumulation of dojo points for positive behaviour and deduction of dojo points for undesirable behaviours gave immediate consequence to students of a positive and negative nature. Other behaviour management approaches used in the classroom included relocation of students to other areas of the classroom and loss of break time. An imperative part of being an early career teacher is the ability to seek out constructive feedback from other professionals and then to implement such advice wherever possible. As can be seen by the comments supplied by Vanessa Murray, one of my mentor teachers, I was able to improve my use of Class Dojo as the favoured behaviour management approach during the second half of my stay at Kangaroo Primary School. A series of English lessons focusing on listening and written comprehension as well as narrative storytelling was undertaken in the 567 Kangaroo PS class. The lessons were based on some of the more commonly known Aboriginal Dreamtime stories. One lesson was a narrative writing task, which I modified for a student who has a severe reading and writing development problem. For the narrative writing task, I decided that in order to maintain engagement in this particular student, that I needed to adjust the output. I had the student record a spoken narrative response on the iPad audio recording application. This task he performed at a very high level. Indeed, this may have been the most engaged he became during almost all of my placement. This assignment undertaken as part of my CDU Teaching Indigenous Learners unit, combined with my attentions at the How to be a More Competent and Confident Teacher of Indigenous Education Students 3R webinar, shows my commitment to personal development of teaching strategies which are considerate of the ways different people learn depending on their linguistic, cultural, religious and socio-economic backgrounds, including students from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander backgrounds. This assignment, undertaken as part of my CDU Inclusive Education unit, demonstrates knowledge of physical, intellectual and social development in students and how these issues can impact on their learning journeys. This assignment investigated the legislative imperatives and policy issues that pertain to the inclusion of students with differences in the mainstream education system. The focus of my research and assignment was the issues faced by students with hearing impairments and how schools need to adjust their approaches to facilitate such as required by the Disability Act. An important part of undertaking placement at any school is being inducted into the processes, practices and expectations of that specific site. Inductions like the one at the beginning of my placement at Willunga Primary School covered the Code of Ethics and Personal Responsibilities documentation prior to beginning the experience. At Kangaroo Primary School, the legislative, administrative and organisational requirements of performing playground duties and marking the role on a daily basis were undertaken. At each of my practicum schools, the need for a valid RAN and DCSI document was discussed and the documents provided as per the legislation. As part of my professional development, I participated in the Maths Association of South Australia annual conference, where I was able to participate in broadening my knowledge of teaching mathematics and interact with other teachers from all over South Australia. In 2017, I attended the Primary Connections Ready pre-service teacher program at Flagstaff Hill. This program identified the optimal approaches to teaching science to primary school age students using the 5E's model and the Primary Connections units material. Knowledge of the appropriate sources of future professional development is key to being a professional. I have discovered that PLINK, a South Australian Department of Education and Child Development portal, is a hub for sourcing development initiatives.